In 1927, Kulik looked around the place, saw thousands of trees laying horizontally in a radial pattern. He walked around the tribes, around the area, and asked what happened, and nearly all of them were reluctant to say what happened. So, what happened? June 30th, 1908. People were blown away. Entire buildings shook. Some fell, some windows broke, and entire trees collapsed. It was devastating. However, this took place around 40 kilometers away from the epicenter, which is pretty far away. What happened at 10 or even at the epicenter would have been blown away instantly. Within this period, 80 million trees ripped off from their roots, and they were all lying in a radial pattern, and around 800 square miles of remote land was just completely destroyed. On some of the consequent days after the event occurred, many people stated that there was a strange glow in the sky, especially in the nighttime. There were reports that said people could read the newspapers in the night really, really well, and extremely good photographs were taken in the nighttime in 1908, which is unheard of. The clouds would also seem to be snow white or golden haze. Although this event occurred, much of the world never even knew about this. There were seismic reports about what happened, and it even went to level 5 on the Richter scale. However, no one really knew about this event. There were newspapers about the events that allegedly occurred, but all the nations didn't really care much about it. The chief curator about that region was supposed to look into it, but when he saw the map and the place he had to go to, he realized it was too dangerous and called it off. Almost no one cared about this event, other than one person, Leonid Kulik, a Soviet mineralogist. Through a bit of research from the newspapers, he found an estimation of where the impact could have happened. He persuaded the Soviet government to give him enough funding and in exchange for meteoric iron. And he proposed the theory that the event that took place in 1908 occurred because of a meteoric strike. After some time, he found a village named Vanavara nearby the region. In that village, he tried to ask many of the indigenous people there and asked them to talk about what happened on that morning. And many were very hesitant to say what happened. However, one did and stated, "Suddenly, in the north sky, the sky was split in two, and high above the forest, the whole northern part of the sky appeared covered with fire. At that moment, there was a banging in the sky and a mighty crash." Although this was from one testimony, many others refused to give an answer, and this is because they believed in the god Agdi. This was a god who cursed the area by smashing trees and killing animals. Kulik then realized he was on the right path to finding where the impact was. With a few people from the village he hired, he eventually found out the trees that were spawned in horizontally lying on the ground and all pointing in one direction, the epicenter. This was because the trees were laid out in a very odd fashion. It was in a radial manner. And we can envision this just like you would see a rock thrown in a puddle. It didn't take long for Kulik to discover the epicenter, and when he did, he was very puzzled. There were two things he did not expect to see. One was the lack of a crater, the other being multiple trees still uproot, however stripped of bark and branches, and they just stood like telephone poles. We would later see this 18 years after this event occurred in another devastating event in Hiroshima, Japan. Although he didn't quite understand why there wasn't a crater, he was sure that the meteor had to have exploded in the air. However, on the journey back, Kulik did not find any remains of meteoric iron. But then again, in 1927, Kulik returned back into Vanavara for more sources. From one of them, he heard, "At breakfast time, I was sitting by the house at Vanavara trading post, facing north. I suddenly saw that directly to the north over Uncle's Tunguska Road, the sky split in two and fire appeared high and wide over the forest. The split in the sky grew larger, and the entire northern side was covered with fire. At that moment, I became so hot that I couldn't bear it, as if my shirt was on fire. From the northern side where the fire was, came strong heat. I wanted to tear off my shirt and throw it down, but then the sky shut closed and a strong thump sounded, and I was thrown a few meters. I lost my senses for a moment, but then my wife ran out and led me to the house. After that, such noise came, as if rocks were falling or cannons were firing. The earth shook, and when I was on the ground, I pressed my head down, fearing rocks would smash me. When the sky opened up, hot wind raced between the houses, like from cannons, which left traces in the ground like pathways, and it damaged some crops. Later we saw that many windows were shattered, and in the barn, a part of the iron block snapped. Afterwards, there were studies done with much more advanced equipment and headed off to the same region as before. Expeditions took place again in the 1950s. It turned out that the impact zone of the meteor was shaped in a butterfly, 10 to 15 meters in diameter, and they found microscopic silicate and magnetite, and was completely foreign to the environment. There was also a large proportion of nickel to iron within that region. From this, they could easily tell that this was a meteor impact, and even hypothesize some of the structures within that meteor and the composition of minerals, elements, etc. Some believe that it would be a stony iron meteor, one of the rarest kind in the world. Others also claim that this could have been an icy composition, and this would occur due to the refraction of icy particles in very, very high altitudes. We would see this once again in the space shuttle launch. Dead plants and vegetation also accumulated the area in which the impact had occurred, further increasing the likelihood that this was indeed a meteor strike. There was a lot more research that was taken into place within the 21st century as well. And this is what happened. The Tunguska meteor, which was approximately 50 to 60 meters in diameter and weighing 220 million pounds, entered the Earth's orbit. The meteor surface heated to around 44,500 degrees Fahrenheit and aimed directly towards Tunguska in Siberia, Russia. When the pressure and temperature was so incredibly high, the meteor exploded and instantly disintegrated. So, how much energy was given off? According to NASA, this was approximately 3 to 4 megatons of TNT. To give some context, 1 kilogram of TNT could potentially destroy a small vehicle, or it could burn a kilogram of wood. A ton of TNT would result in an entire house collapsing and potentially exploding. 20 kilotons of TNT would result in something very close to what happened with the first atomic bomb. 180 times that of the atomic bomb is the energy that was released by this meteor. This meteor was also going incredibly fast at 33,500 miles per hour, and this is approximately 9 miles per second. If this meteor hit 2 seconds after or before the impact, then things could have taken a turn for history. From no nations to almost the biggest nations helping in would have been a drastic change and potentially change the result of the World War. Who knows? Let's hypothesize for a bit. Let's say that this meteor were to hit New York in 1908, one of the biggest industries and cities that was expanding in the US. If this asteroid were to hit 5 minutes before impact and hit New York instead, then the destruction would be absolutely catastrophic. The strongest financial system in the US would completely shut down. The domestic economy would completely collapse, and this would potentially affect international affairs and foreign affairs. The entire city would literally not exist. Skyscrapers would come down crashing, and many of the civilians would have died instantly. There would also be huge seismic waves that would travel across the ocean as well, and result in tsunamis that are the height of 50 feet or above. If this would have hit Paris at the same time in 1908, much of the industry in Europe would also completely shut down. However, this situation is likely not to happen again. Scientists have been ever so cautious now than ever about unwelcoming meteors. Approximately 17,000 meteors end up in the Earth's atmosphere, and almost all of them just completely burn up due to the friction in the atmosphere, and the ones that survive are not very deadly. The probability of this ever happening again in the near future, 200 or 300 years in the future, is most likely going to be zero. And with this, we're probably in safe hands. But otherwise, that's about it. Take care.